Most Stephen King fans believe the July 1963 eclipse connecting Gerald's game and Dolores Claiborne is just a clever little Easter egg about domestic trauma. They're dead wrong. It isn't just a metaphor. It's a literal psychic tether born from a massive cosmic horror event. On July 20th, 1963, a total solar eclipse plunged the state of Maine into unnatural darkness. But we aren't just looking at the sky. We're looking at the suffocating hell two women experienced at the exact same moment. At Dark Score Lake, young Jessie Mahout sits paralyzed on her father's lap. The horror isn't the vanishing sun. It's the sound of his ragged breathing, the sour smell of his sweat, and the sickening friction of him shifting his weight. Miles away on Little Tall Island, Dolores Claiborne feels the freezing, unnatural chill in the summer air, smelling the foul, damp rot of the earth as her husband falls into an old, dry well. As the sun vanishes entirely, reality thins. The universe tears open, and a psychic liminal space violently collides their minds. For a fraction of a second, the terrified girl and the desperate mother see and feel each other through the pitch-black void. But why did the universe choose to link these two specific souls? Because in King's multiverse, when you ring a bell of pure agony in the dark, something much older and far more monstrous hears it. Chapter 1. The 1963 Telepathic Tether. We begin not with monsters in the closet, but with the sky. The date is July 20th, 1963. A massive celestial event casts a heavy, unnatural shadow over the state of Maine. This is a total solar eclipse. The moon moves dead center in front of the sun. The world goes pitch black in the middle of a hot summer afternoon. Stephen King anchors his most grounded psychological horrors to this exact real-world date. To most of the world, an eclipse is a marvel of astronomy. But in the King universe, an eclipse is a cosmic trigger. It breaks the rules of reality. It tells the universe that for a few minutes, the natural order is dead. Light becomes dark. Day becomes night. Safety becomes absolute terror. The shadow of the moon travels across the earth at thousands of miles per hour. It sweeps over the Canadian border. It hits the deep woods of Maine. It plunges entire towns into a freezing purple twilight. The temperature plummets. Summer birds stop singing in the trees. Crickets begin to chirp in the grass, confused by the sudden nightfall. The environment reacts with pure instinctual panic. Animals know the change is wrong. The air smells like copper and raw ozone. A heavy, suffocating pressure builds in the atmosphere. This is the grand stage Stephen King sets for the most crucial crossover in his entire mythos. Down below, at Dark Score Lake, 10-year-old Jessie Mahout sits on the wooden deck of her family vacation home. The lake water ripples in the strange, fading light. The air feels thick and humid against her skin. Jessie holds a piece of smoked glass up to her eyes. The glass is smeared with thick black soot. This is a crude tool to protect her vision from the burning rays of the sun. But the real danger is not in the sky. The real danger is right behind her. Jessie is sitting on the lap of her father, Tom Mahout. The scent of the fresh lake water mixes with the sour, nervous sweat radiating from her father's pores. The wood of the deck creaks beneath the weight of his shifting body. Jessie feels the rough, scratchy fabric of his trousers against her bare legs. She hears his breathing. The sound turns ragged and shallow. The heat of his skin presses against her back. The sensation is suffocating. Every instinct in her young mind screams at her to stand up and run toward the trees. But her body stays frozen in place. This is her father. This is the man who buys her ice cream. This is the man who protects her from the shadows. The psychological dissonance shatters her sense of reality. The sun is vanishing above her, and her entire world is collapsing below her. She feels his hand creep up her thigh. The movement is deliberate. The sensation is alien and horrifying. It feels like a massive, heavy spider crawling over her skin. She tries to focus her eyes on the shrinking sliver of the sun through the soot-stained glass. She tries to force her mind to leave her physical body. She wants to float up into the cold space above the clouds. The darkness of the eclipse provides a twisted cover for Tom Mahout. He uses the shadow of the moon to mask his vile actions. He relies on the silence of the woods to muffle the destruction of his daughter's innocence. But that isn't even the darkest part. Miles away from the quiet shores of Dark Score Lake, the air tastes like harsh brine and dead fish. We are on the rocky coast of Little Tall Island. The ocean waves crash violently against the jagged stones. The sky over the isolated island turns a bruised, sickly purple. Dolores Claiborne stands in the dry dirt near a patch of wild blackberry bushes. Her hands are calloused and rough. Her muscles ache from years of brutal, unpaid domestic labor. The stifling heat of the summer day sticks her cheap cotton dress to her back. But she does not care about the heat. She only cares about the trap. Hidden beneath the overgrown weeds and rotting wood is an old, dry well. The stones lining the deep pit are slick with ancient moss. The smell of damp, dead earth wafts up from the black hole. Dolores uses the exact same cover of the eclipse to execute a desperate plan. She intends to kill her husband, Joe St. George. Joe stumbles through the thick brush. The stench of cheap, sour whiskey and unwashed clothes precedes his arrival. He is a cruel, violent man. He is a predator. The tension in the air snaps like a dry twig underfoot. Joe steps onto the rotted boards covering the well. The old wood groans under his boots. The fibers splinter and break with a loud, violent crack. Joe plunges into the darkness. The sound of his heavy body hitting the stone walls echoes out of the deep pit. A thick cloud of dust billows up into the strange, dim air. Dolores looks down. She feels the physical strain of the moment. Her heart hammers against her ribs. Her lungs burn for oxygen. She has pushed a human being to his death. The sheer physical and emotional toll of the act threatens to crush her mind. The true horror of this moment transcends the physical abuse on the deck and the murder in the weeds. In the Stephen King multiverse, the fabric of reality is not a solid wall. It is a thin, fragile membrane. High-stress environments, massive trauma, and astronomical anomalies weaken that membrane. When the moon covers the sun completely, a phenomenon known as totality begins. For a few agonizing seconds, a ring of white fire, the corona, burns in the pitch-black sky. The light takes on a metallic, sickly quality. During this exact moment of totality, the boundary between individual human minds dissolves completely. King calls this psychic ability the touch, or the shining. Most people possess a tiny fraction of this power. It usually manifests as a gut feeling or a bad dream, but extreme agony acts as a supernatural amplifier. It turns a tiny, invisible spark into a blinding lighthouse beam. Jessie Mahout is radiating pure, helpless terror. Dolores Claiborne is radiating pure, violent survival instinct. These two intense emotional frequencies vibrate at the exact same pitch. The total solar eclipse acts as a massive cosmic satellite dish. It bounces their psychic signals across the vast, dark woods of Maine. Jessie closes her eyes tight behind the smoked glass. The smell of her father's sweat vanishes. In an instant, her nostrils fill with the sharp, stinging scent of ocean salt and dead weeds. The sound of her father's ragged breathing fades away into nothing. Instead, she hears the distant rhythmic crashing of heavy ocean waves. She opens her mind's eye. She does not see the wooden deck of the lake house. She sees a dirt clearing. She sees a skinny woman with dark hair pinned up in a tight bun. The woman is kneeling in the dust. Next to the woman is a puddle of white fabric. This fabric is a slip. Jessie feels the rough, callous texture of the woman's hands as if they were her own hands. She feels a massive surge of relentless, unyielding anger. This anger does not belong to a 10-year-old girl. It belongs to the woman by the well. At that exact same fraction of a second, Dolores looks away from the dust cloud rising out of the pit. The foul smell of the damp earth vanishes from her nose. She smells the fresh, pine-scented air of a calm, inland lake. The sound of Joe groaning in the dark echoes away into total silence. Dolores stares into the unnatural twilight and sees a vivid hallucination. She sees a terrified young girl. The girl is holding a piece of blackened glass. Dolores sees the heavy, suffocating shadow of a man sitting behind the girl. She sees the man's hand resting on the girl's leg. The hand is creeping far too high. The sight makes Dolores's stomach churn with intense revulsion. She feels the girl's paralyzing fear. She feels the urge to shrink away and disappear into the wood. This is not a metaphor. This is a literal, telepathic collision. Two human souls, separated by miles of deep pine woods and cold ocean water, crash into each other. They share a single, unified consciousness. Jessie experiences the raw power of a woman taking ultimate control of her miserable life. Dolores experiences the heartbreaking vulnerability of a child facing ultimate betrayal. The universe forces them to witness each other's defining moment of trauma. This psychic tether binds them together permanently. The eclipse creates a bridge of shared suffering. The universe of Stephen King is governed by an invisible force called Ka. Ka is destiny. Ka is a giant wheel that crushes everything in its path. Ka does not care about human suffering. The connection between Jessie and Dolores is a prime example of Ka at work. The universe did not link them to comfort them. The universe linked them because their combined trauma generated a massive amount of psychic energy. Energy attracts attention. In the dark spaces between worlds, the Macroverse, entities feed on this exact kind of pain. The eclipse tore the roof off their world. It exposed their glowing, wounded minds to the infinite dark. The moment of totality ends. The moon slides forward along its celestial path. A brilliant, blinding sliver of true sunlight pierces the gloom. This is the diamond ring effect. The light hits the earth like a physical blow. The unnatural silence shatters into a million pieces. The crickets stop chirping in the grass. The summer birds resume their erratic songs in the branches. The temperature begins to rise back to a normal summer heat. The heavy, oppressive pressure in the atmosphere lifts. Reality snaps back into its proper place. The psychic bridge collapses into dust. On the deck at Darkscore Lake, Jessie is slammed back into her own physical body. The smell of ocean salt is gone. The sour stench of her father returns to her nose. The feeling of rough, calloused hands vanishes from her fingers. She is a helpless child once again, but something deep inside her brain has changed. A tiny seed of Dolores's ferocious survival instinct remains planted in the back of her mind. The memory of the woman with the dark hair will haunt her for decades. She will bury this memory deep in her subconscious. She will lock it in a mental box. But the psychic tether remains intact. It is a dormant wire, waiting for the exact right moment to spark back to life. On Little Tall Island, Dolores blinks her eyes against the returning sunlight. The vision of the terrified girl fades into the bright glare. The smell of pine trees evaporates from the air. The stench of the rotting well fills her nose once more. She hears Joe groaning in the dark pit below her feet. The momentary supernatural distraction is over. The crushing weight of her reality returns to her shoulders. But the vision of the girl leaves a permanent scar on her soul. It hardens her resolve. The sight of that man's hand on the child's leg reminds Dolores exactly why she orchestrated this murder. It confirms her deepest belief. It validates her violent choice. This telepathic tether represents a profound truth in Stephen King's massive lore. Trauma isolates victims. It builds invisible walls around them. Abusers rely on this strict isolation. They operate in the shadows. They demand absolute silence. Tom Mahout and Joe St. George are different men with different methods, but they use the exact same weapon: secrecy. The Eclipse strips away that secrecy for one fraction of a second. The cosmic event forces the darkness into the light. By connecting Jesse and Dolores, the universe breaks their isolation. It proves that their pain is not unique. It proves that they are not alone. This shared nightmare is the ultimate act of cosmic defiance against their abusers. The men thought they had total control. The men thought no one was watching. But the universe was watching. And the universe made sure these two women witnessed each other. Let us examine the intense physical toll of this connection. Telepathy in the King universe is never a gentle experience. It burns the mind. It causes sudden nosebleeds. It triggers blinding migraines. The human brain is not wired to process two distinct realities at the exact same time. The sensory overload is catastrophic. Jessie feels a sharp, stabbing pain behind her eyes. Her ears ring with a high-pitched whine. Her skin flushes with a sudden unnatural fever. The sheer volume of sensory data, the sights, the smells, the raw emotions, threatens to short-circuit her entire nervous system. She squeezes the smoked glass so hard her knuckles turn stark white. She bites her lower lip until she tastes the hot, metallic tang of her own blood. Dolores experiences a similar physical shock on the island. A wave of intense nausea washes over her body. Her knees buckle under her weight. She grabs her head with her dirt-stained hands. The ground beneath her boots seems to tilt and spin out of control. The bitter taste of bile rises in her throat. The sudden influx of Jessie's terror is like swallowing a solid block of ice. It freezes her internal organs. It knocks the breath out of her lungs. She has to force herself to inhale the foul air rising from the well just to stay conscious and upright. This visceral reaction proves the sheer power of the tether. It is a physical violation as much as a mental one. The boundaries of their individual identities rupture. For that one brief, agonizing second, Jessie Mahout is Dolores Claiborne, and Dolores Claiborne is Jessie Mahout. They share a singular heartbeat. They draw a singular breath. They occupy the exact same space in the psychic fabric of the universe. The physical objects surrounding them during this event take on massive symbolic weight in the lore. The piece of smoked glass in Jessie's hand is a tool designed to look safely at the burning sun, but it utterly fails to protect her from the darkness of her own father. The glass becomes a twisted lens of truth. It filters out the blinding lies of her childhood and reveals the stark, horrifying reality of her situation. She views the eclipse through a literal layer of filth. This mirrors the exact way her father taints her life with his vile actions. The dry well on Little Tall Island serves as a literal and figurative grave. It is a deep pit of stagnant, dead history. Joe St. George falls into this pit because he is a creature of base, ugly desires. The well is the earth opening its mouth to swallow a monster. When Dolores looks down into the pitch-black darkness, she is looking at the physical manifestation of her own trapped existence. She has lived in a psychological well for years. Pushing Joe into the physical well is her only way of climbing out. Stephen King often uses extreme natural phenomena to mirror human corruption. In the town of Derry, torrential rainstorms signal the bloody awakening of Pennywise. In the Overlook Hotel, heavy winter blizzards trap the Torrance family with their inner demons. In the state of Maine on July 20th, 1963, the total solar eclipse acts as the ultimate amplifier for human evil. The temporary death of the sun gives the monsters permission to play their games. It creates a liminal zone. A liminal zone is a space between states of being. It is neither day nor night. It is neither safe nor dangerous. It is a threshold of pure chaos. Jessie and Dolores cross this cosmic threshold. They step into the psychic void. The void strips away their physical bodies and reduces them to pure, raw, emotional energy. This energy seeks a mirror in the dark, like calls to like. The exact frequency of victimization and the exact frequency of violent retaliation find each other across the miles. The tether forms. It is an invisible rope made of starlight and human suffering. The payoff of this monumental law point is not immediate. The brilliance of King's interconnected universe is his immense patience. He introduces this profound connection in 1992 and 1993 through two entirely separate novels. Readers who only picked up the book about the handcuff survival game saw a bizarre, unexplained hallucination of a woman near a well. Readers who only picked up the book about the island murder confession saw a random, confusing vision of a little girl on a man's lap. The full, horrifying picture only emerges when you place the two pieces together on the table. The cosmic puzzle completes itself. The tether remains a low background hum for decades. Jessie grows into a fractured, deeply traumatized adult woman. Dolores grows into a hard, bitter old survivor. They live their lives miles apart. They never meet in person. They never speak on a telephone. They never exchange a single letter. But the invisible rope ties their minds together. Whenever Jessie feels trapped in a corner, a phantom scent of salty ocean air brushes her face. Whenever Dolores feels threatened, a phantom echo of a crying child rings in her ears. This is the ultimate survival mechanism born from the Macroverse. The universe gave them a psychic lifeline. Decades later, when Jessie finds herself handcuffed to a heavy mahogany bed with a stray dog eating her dead husband on the floor, she will desperately need that lifeline. She will need the sheer strength of the woman with the dark hair. She will reach across the decades of time, grab the psychic rope, and pull herself out of her own trap. The 1963 eclipse was not just an astronomical anomaly. It was the violent forging of a weapon. It was the creation of a shared psychological shield. We have witnessed the cosmic collision. We have felt the psychic shockwave rattle their skulls. We know the exact moment their minds tethered together in the dark. But the sheer magnitude of this supernatural event obscures a much more grounded truth. The eclipse did not create the terror. The eclipse merely illuminated it. To understand why the universe deemed these two women worthy of such a profound connection, we must strip away the stars. We must look away from the sky and step inside their homes. Because before the universe tore open, the real monsters were already sitting at the dinner table, and the methods these men used to build their traps are far more terrifying than any glitch in the matrix of reality. Chapter 2. In the Path of the Eclipse. To understand the sheer magnitude of the cosmic horror lurking at the edges of this law, we must first strip away the stars. We must drag our focus down from the pitch-black sky and force ourselves to look at the dirt. We must look at the mundane, filthy reality of the human condition. In the vast, sprawling multiverse of Stephen King, fans are conditioned to look for the monster in the closet. We expect a shape-shifting clown dwelling in the sewers of Derry. We look for ancient vampires infesting the rotting houses of Salem's Lot. We anticipate malevolent spirits haunting the carpeted hallways of the Overlook Hotel. We are trained to fear the supernatural. But in 1992, Stephen King made a deliberate, terrifying choice. He chose to demonstrate that the most dangerous monsters in his universe do not possess fangs, and they do not come from the spaces between dimensions. They wear cheap suits, they drink stale beer, they sit at the family dinner table. Before the two separate novels existed on bookstore shelves, Stephen King conceived a singular, massive literary project. He intended to write one colossal, interwoven epic. The working title for this immense manuscript was In the Path of the Eclipse. The original concept was to bind the narratives of a battered working-class housewife and a traumatized upper-middle-class girl into one sprawling volume. The 1963 total solar eclipse was not meant to be a mere Easter egg connecting two distinct books. It was the central spine of the entire narrative. The eclipse was the focal point where the gravity of their shared suffering would collide. However, as the writing process progressed, a grim realization took hold. The sheer density of the psychological trauma contained within the pages became too heavy to bear. The physical and sexual violence endured by Dolores Claiborne, her daughter Selena, and young Jessie Mahout constituted an overwhelming volume of human suffering. To trap all of these women inside the confines of a single book would suffocate the reader. The emotional toll was crushing. King ultimately decided to split in the path of the eclipse down the middle. He severed the manuscript, creating two distinct parallel narratives. Yet he left the bleeding connective tissue intact. He left the 1963 eclipse as the permanent scar bridging their worlds. To fully grasp the lore of this connection, we have to examine the foundational baseline. We must dissect the architecture of the traps built by the two primary antagonists. We must understand how these ordinary men utilize the cover of shadows to enact their atrocities. We begin with the lake house. We begin with Tom Mahout. Tom Mahout presents the facade of a successful, respectable man. He wears crisp shirts. He speaks with authority. He provides a comfortable upper-middle-class life for his family at their vacation home on Darkscore Lake. To 10-year-old Jessie, he is a figure of absolute safety. He calls her Mouse, a pet name designed to sound endearing. But in the context of Stephen King's psychological horror, the nickname Mouse takes on a sickening, predatory resonance. A mouse is small. A mouse is fragile. A mouse is prey. The horror of Tom Mahout does not rely on physical brute force. He does not beat his daughter into submission. Instead, he employs a sophisticated, calculated brand of psychological warfare. His weapon of choice is manipulation. The events on the wooden deck during the eclipse were not a sudden, uncontrollable crime of passion. Tom orchestrated the entire scenario. He meticulously engineered the isolation. He exploited the deteriorating state of his marriage to Jessie's mother, Sally, ensuring that mother and daughter were driven apart by petty conflicts. He deliberately requested that Jessie wear a specific sundress, one that she had outgrown, one that fit far too tight against her young frame. He instructed her to sit on his lap. He built the trap, piece by piece, hiding his monstrous intent behind the mask of a loving father wanting to share an astronomical phenomenon with his little girl. The physical act of the assault on the deck is horrific, but the true psychological devastation occurs in the immediate aftermath. When the sun returns and the eclipse ends, Tom Mahout faces a critical problem. He has committed an unspeakable act. He needs absolute silence to protect his reputation and his comfortable life. He cannot simply threaten Jessie with physical violence. That might leave marks, or it might provoke her to run screaming to her mother. Instead, he builds a prison inside her own mind. We must focus on the sensory details of the conversation that follows. They move away from the deck. The air still smells of the lingering ozone from the eclipse, but it mixes with the sickening scent of Tom's nervous sweat and the peppermint yum-yum lipstick she is wearing. Tom sits Jessie down. He does not look her in the eye. This lack of eye contact is a deliberate theatrical performance. He projects a facade of immense shame and crippling guilt. He speaks in a low, trembling voice. He tells her that he is a terrible man. He tells her that he must confess his sins to her mother. He paints a vivid, terrifying picture of the consequences. The family will shatter. The marriage will end in a catastrophic divorce. The home will break apart, and the resulting explosion will destroy everyone they love. He places a colossal, unbearable weight squarely onto the narrow shoulders of a 10-year-old girl. He relies on reverse psychology. By threatening to confess and destroy the family, he forces Jessie into a state of blind panic. Her childish instinct is to preserve her world at all costs. She begs him not to tell. She pleads with him to keep the secret. This is the masterstroke of Tom Mahout's evil. He sighs a heavy, fake sigh. He tells Jessie that they will try it your way. With a few carefully chosen words, Tom Mahout rewrites reality. He convinces the victim that concealing the crime was her idea. He transforms himself from the predator into the reluctant accomplice, and he transforms Jessie into the architect of the cover-up. The psychological dissonance is absolute. Jessie feels the crushing guilt of a crime she did not commit. She swallows the trauma. She pushes the memory of the rough fabric, the sour sweat, and the unnatural heat deep into the darkest vault of her subconscious. Tom walks away clean, leaving his daughter to drown in an ocean of misplaced shame. The trap is complete. The mouse is caught. Now, we shift our focus away from the calm waters of Dark Score Lake. We travel miles away to the harsh, jagged rocks of Little Tall Island. The environment here is entirely different. The air does not smell of fresh pine and crisp lake water. The wind howling off the Atlantic Ocean carries the scent of dead fish, freezing salt spray, and rotting seaweed. The socio-economic reality is bleak. This is a working-class purgatory. Here the horror is loud, the horror is violent, the horror is named Joe St. George. If Tom Mahout is a silent, creeping spider, Joe St. George is a blunt, heavy instrument. He is an alcoholic. The stench of cheap, sour whiskey and stale cigarette smoke oozes from his pores. He operates on sheer physical intimidation. The St. George household is a battleground of domestic terror. Dolores Claiborne lives in a state of constant grinding hypervigilance. She memorizes the sound of his boots on the front porch. She learns to read the precise angle of his shoulders to determine how much violence the evening will hold. King masterfully utilizes the show-don't-tell technique to manifest this environment. We do not just read that Joe is mean. We feel the sudden, explosive impact of a heavy piece of stove wood slamming into the small of Dolores's back while she stands at the kitchen counter. We hear the sickening thud of the dense wood striking bone. We experience the blinding flash of white-hot agony shooting up her spine. We taste the copper blood in her mouth as she bites her tongue to keep from screaming. Joe does not hit her in the face where the bruises might provoke questions from the islanders. He strikes her where the clothing hides the damage. This calculated brutality reinforces the theme of the hidden, mundane horror. Despite the relentless physical abuse, Dolores possesses a fierce, unbreakable core of resilience. She endures the beatings, she takes the pain, she focuses all her energy on a singular goal, the survival and escape of her children, specifically her bright, intelligent daughter, Selena. Dolores subjects herself to backbreaking, humiliating domestic labor. She scrubs the floors of the wealthy, demanding Vera Donovan. Her hands grow rough, cracked, and calloused from harsh chemical soaps and freezing water. Every spare penny she earns goes into a secret bank account. This account is the ultimate lifeline. It is the college fund that will buy Selena a ticket off Little Tall Island. It is a tangible manifestation of hope in a world devoid of light. Then comes the moment the illusion of hope shatters. Dolores walks into the sterile, quiet lobby of the local bank. The air conditioning hums a low, mechanical drone. The teller hands her the passbook. Dolores looks at the numbers printed on the crisp paper. The account is empty. The money is gone. Joe St. George discovered the hidden passbook. He walked into the bank, utilized his legal authority as the head of the patriarchal household, and drained every single cent. The visceral reaction Dolores experiences is a masterclass in written terror. It is not a scream. It is a total systemic collapse. The temperature in the room seems to drop to absolute zero. A cold, heavy stone forms in the pit of her stomach. The fluorescent lights overhead buzz with a deafening, insect-like intensity. The air turns to thick, unbreathable mud. The realization hits her with the force of a freight train. Joe has not just stolen money. He has stolen the future. He has severed the only rope leading out of the deep, dark pit. He has guaranteed that Selena will remain trapped on the island, suffocating under his control. But that isn't even the darkest part. The physical beatings, the verbal degradation, and the devastating financial theft pale in comparison to the true horror Joe St. George inflicts upon his family. Dolores notices a change in Selena. The bright, confident honor student begins to wither. Selena grows withdrawn. She flinches at sudden movements. Her eyes carry a haunted, hollow expression. The terrifying truth slowly reveals itself. The monster has not just been striking the mother. The monster has been preying on the daughter. Unbeknownst to Dolores, Joe has been systematically grooming and sexually abusing 14-year-old Selena. The methods he uses mirror the psychological gaslighting employed by Tom Mahout. Joe twists the narrative of the household. He plays the victim. He approaches Selena with fake tears and stories of a cruel, unloving wife. He manipulates the teenager's natural empathy. He constructs a false intimacy based on shared suffering. He uses the isolation of the island and the cover of his own authority to corner her. He corners her inside the suffocating walls of their own home, forcing her into vile acts while her mother works oblivious. He silences her with fear. He convinces Selena that if she speaks a word of the abuse, Dolores will be the one to suffer the consequences. He gives Selena a cameo necklace, a physical token binding her to the horrific secret. When Dolores finally discovers the truth of the molestation, the fundamental rules of her universe change. The fragile treaty of endurance evaporates. Self-preservation is no longer sufficient motivation. Dolores cannot call the police. In the patriarchal society of 1960s Maine, the authorities will not listen to the hysterical claims of a battered wife against a property-owning husband. The law offers no protection. The system is designed to maintain the silence. Dolores is pushed into a corner where only one option remains. To save the child, the mother must become the executioner. This brings us back to the baseline context of the law. Stephen King constructed In the Path of the Eclipse to demonstrate the terrifying mechanics of isolation. Abusive men require silence to operate. They thrive in environments where the doors remain locked and the curtains remain drawn. They construct localized artificial eclipses inside their own homes. Tom Mahout used the shadow of an astronomical event to hide his hands. He used the threat of a broken family to eclipse the truth in Jesse's mind. Joe St. George used the shadow of his patriarchal authority to hide his theft and his violence. He used the threat of further abuse to eclipse the truth in Selena's voice. The horror of these ordinary men lies in their absolute confidence. They believe they have perfect control over their environments. They believe the women and children they victimize are entirely helpless. They believe the universe is blind to their actions. The cosmic irony, the foundational twist of this specific piece of Stephen King lore, is that the universe is not blind. The 1963 total solar eclipse serves as the ultimate narrative mirror. A solar eclipse is a moment when the moon, a dead rock, perfectly covers the sun, the source of all light and life. It is an unnatural imposition of darkness. This mirrors the exact way Tom and Joe impose their darkness upon their families. They block out the light. They force their victims to live in the freezing, terrifying shadow. But a total eclipse only lasts for a few minutes. The darkness is temporary. The shadow must eventually pass. This astronomical fact dictates the psychological arcs of both Jesse and Dolores. They are forced into the dark, but the human mind possesses an incredible, terrifying capacity for adaptation. Trauma does not simply vanish, it ferments. It changes the chemical structure of the brain. For Dolores Claiborne, the trauma hardens into a weapon. The realization of the abuse acts as a catalyst. She sheds the skin of the helpless victim. She calculates, she plans. She buys Joe a bottle of scotch. She makes him a sandwich. She lowers his guard with a rare moment of manufactured affection. She waits for the exact moment the sky turns black, and then she uses his own violent temper against him. She goads him. She baits the trap. She leads the monster directly to the rotting wood covering the old, dry well. The sound of the snapping boards and Joe's echoing screams are the sounds of a woman reclaiming her agency through the only avenue left available to her: lethal force. Dolores trades the temporary terror of the eclipse for a lifetime of hard, unyielding guilt. She lives with the blood on her hands because the alternative was letting the monster consume her child. For Jessie Mahout, the trauma follows a very different trajectory. The psychological manipulation executed by her father is so precise, so devastatingly effective, that it halts her emotional development. The 10-year-old girl never truly grows up. She constructs a massive psychological dam inside her mind. She pours layers of mental concrete over the memory of the rough fabric, the heavy breathing, and the taste of the peppermint lipstick. She locks the truth away. She convinces herself that she is a normal, happy person. She marries an older man, Gerald, a man who eerily mirrors the controlling authority of her father. She submits to his strange, degrading games because her subconscious mind has been trained to accept mistreatment as a form of love. The mouse remains caught in the trap for decades. The shadow of the eclipse never really lifts from her life. She merely learns to navigate the dark without opening her eyes. This is the grim, heavy reality of the severed manuscript. The baseline lore proves that you do not need ancient curses or cosmic entities to generate pure, unfiltered terror. You only need a man who believes he owns the people living under his roof. You only need the suffocating silence of a secret kept too long. The terror is grounded in the scent of sour whiskey, the ticking of a living room clock, the rough texture of a calloused hand, and the metallic click of a locked door. The monsters in the path of the eclipse are horrifying precisely because they are completely, unremarkably human. Yet, in the grand architecture of Stephen King's multiverse, intense, concentrated human agony is never isolated. It is a fundamental law of his reality that trauma generates energy. When a mind is fractured by abuse, the resulting psychological friction creates a spark. When two minds are fractured simultaneously, under the exact same cosmic conditions, the spark becomes a raging fire. The baseline context is established. We have examined the filthy, grounded reality of the traps. We have seen the men who built them. We know exactly why Dolores Claiborne pushed a man down a well. We know exactly why Jessie Mahout buried her childhood in a mental vault. We understand the mundane horror of the secrets kept in the dark. However, secrets possess a mass. They possess a gravitational pull. You can bury a secret under layers of concrete, or you can throw a secret down a deep, dry well, but it will never remain quiet. Trauma festers. It reaches out. The psychic tether forged during the 3 minutes of totality in 1963 did not break when the sun returned. It merely went dormant. It sank deep into the fabric of the universe, waiting for the perfect, agonizing moment to snap taut. The mundane horror of abusive men is terrifying enough on its own. It is the grim reality that millions face without the interference of the supernatural. But in Stephen King's multiverse, concentrated, agonizing trauma like this does not just fade away. It acts as a beacon. It acts as a blinding flare shot into the empty sky. When you ring a bell of pure, unadulterated terror in the dark, something else hears it. Chapter 3. The Shadow over Maine. We must leave the past behind and step into the suffocating reality of the present. Decades have passed since the sky turned black in the summer of 1963. The 10-year-old girl on the wooden deck is gone. In her place is a grown woman. Jessie Burlingame is trapped in a nightmare that feels entirely mundane at first glance. But it is built on a foundation of massive, unresolved terror. We are no longer on the coast of Little Tall Island, nor are we looking at the stars. We are isolated deep in the woods of western Maine, near the quiet waters of Kashwakamak Lake. The season is October. The summer vacationers have all packed up and left. The neighboring houses sit empty. The surrounding forest is a wall of dead, silent pine trees. Inside the remote cabin, the air is stagnant. The heavy, oppressive silence is broken only by the rhythmic, metallic clinking of steel chains against wood. Jessie is lying on her back on a massive, heavy mahogany bed. Her arms are stretched far above her head. Cold, heavy, police-grade steel handcuffs bite deep into the fragile skin of her wrists. The metal is unforgiving. Every time she breathes, every time her chest rises and falls, the jagged edges of the cuffs chafe against her bone. Her muscles scream with the burning, agonizing lactic acid buildup of remaining in one unnatural position for too long. Her fingers are swollen. A dull, throbbing numbness creeps down her arms. The physical pain is immense, but the psychological terror is infinite. On the hardwood floor, right beside the bed, lies her husband. Gerald Burlingame is a successful lawyer. He is an authoritative man. He brought her to this empty cabin for a romantic getaway, intending to play a twisted game of bondage. He locked the cuffs. He ignored her safe word. He ignored her genuine panic. He smiled while she begged him to stop. In a moment of blind, defensive panic, Jessie kicked him hard in the stomach and groin. But Gerald did not just stumble backward. The shock, combined with his age and physical condition, triggered a massive, catastrophic heart attack. Now, Gerald is dead. The sensory reality of the bedroom shifts from a place of uncomfortable intimacy to a literal tomb. Jessie stares at the ceiling. The rough texture of the wooden beam seems to press down on her. The temperature in the cabin begins to drop as the afternoon sun sinks behind the trees. She feels the sticky, freezing layer of nervous sweat drying on her skin. The smell in the room begins to change. The faint, expensive scent of Gerald's cologne mixes with the sudden, sharp odor of human waste as his bowels release in death. The metallic tang of her own fear coats the back of her throat. She's completely isolated. The keys to the handcuffs rest on a wooden bureau, inches out of her reach. The house is locked. The nearest neighbor is miles away. Then, the true horror of the isolation manifests. It does not come from the shadows. It comes through the unlatched back door. Jessie hears a sound. It is a dry, clicking noise. It is the sound of hard nails tapping against the wooden floorboards. A dog enters the bedroom. This is not a domesticated pet. This is Prince. Prince is a stray dog, abandoned in the woods by his previous owner to avoid a simple tax fee. Prince has spent months starving in the harsh Maine wilderness. He is feral. He is desperate. The smell of fresh blood and death draws him into the cabin like a magnet. Jessie watches in paralyzed horror as the gaunt, emaciated animal approaches her dead husband. She smells the foul, wet odor of the dog's unwashed fur. She smells the hot stench of his breath. Prince does not see a human being on the floor. Prince sees a meal. The dog begins to eat. Jessie hears the wet, sickening sound of teeth tearing into soft flesh. She hears the wet slaps of the dog chewing. She hears the horrific crunch of cartilage giving way under jaw pressure. The dog is literally eating Gerald's face. The sheer visceral nightmare of the situation overloads Jessie's nervous system. The sound of the dog feeding echoes off the walls of the small cabin, magnifying in her ears until it sounds like a roaring machine. As the hours drag on, the physical deprivation accelerates the collapse of her mind. Thirst becomes a physical weapon. Her throat feels like it is stuffed with dry cotton. Her tongue swells, sticking to the roof of her mouth. A glass of water sits on a shelf above the bed, taunting her. It is so close she can see the condensation on the glass, yet she cannot grasp it. The desperate, burning need for hydration cracks the foundation of her sanity. With her body immobilized and her physical reality reduced to a torture chamber, her brain attempts to survive by splitting apart. Jessie begins to hallucinate. The silence of the empty cabin fills with voices. These are not random whispers. These are distinct, fully formed personalities living inside her own skull. Her subconscious mind fractures into separate entities to process the unbearable trauma of her impending death. The first voice to emerge is sharp, critical, and steeped in the traditional patriarchal conditioning of her childhood. Jessie names this voice Goodwife Burlingame, or Goody for short. Goody sounds like an older, defeated woman. Goody represents the submissive, complicit side of femininity. She is the voice of the 1950s housewife. When Jessie struggles against the steel cuffs, the metal biting deeper into her raw skin, Goody speaks up. Goody tells her to stop fighting. Goody tells her to lay still, to be a good girl, and to wait for a man to come and rescue her. The voice is calm, but the calmness is toxic. Goody insists that creating a scene, or fighting back, will only make the situation worse. This voice is the internalized echo of her mother, Sally Mahout. It is the voice that tells a woman to accept the pain, because the pain is just part of the bargain. But Goody is not the only resident inside Jessie's fracturing mind. A second, far more aggressive voice shatters the toxic calm. This is the voice of Ruth Neary. Ruth was Jessie's bold, unapologetic, feminist college roommate. In the real world, Jessie abandoned her friendship with Ruth years ago because Ruth pushed too hard, asked too many questions, and threatened to expose the dark secrets of Jessie's past. But in the prison of the cabin, the memory of Ruth becomes a vital survival tool. Ruth's voice is loud, it is sarcastic, it is entirely unconcerned with politeness. When Goodwife Burlingame tells Jessie to wait quietly, Ruth screams back. Ruth tells Jessie that if she waits, she will die on this bed. Ruth looks at the dead body of Gerald on the floor and states bluntly that his death is his own fault. The psychological battlefield inside the cabin is intense. The listener is trapped in a closed loop of arguing voices. Jessie hears the constant grating bickering between Goody's submission and Ruth's defiance. The physical pain in her wrists becomes the background noise to the war happening inside her head. The arguments force Jessie to confront a terrible truth. She did not just end up on this bed by accident. She ended up handcuffed to a mahogany headboard because she spent her entire life submitting to the controlling men around her. Gerald's twisted game was just the final, fatal manifestation of a pattern established decades ago. To understand why Jessie's mind is breaking down in this specific way, we must examine a profound psychological concept at the core of this law. We must look at the Freudian theory of Nachträglichkeit, which translates to delayed trauma or belatedness. In the aftermath of extreme horror, the human brain often cannot process the event in the moment it occurs. The trauma is simply too massive. So, the brain represses it. It buries the memory in a dark, silent vault. The victim continues to live a seemingly normal life. But the trauma does not disappear. It waits. It waits for a secondary trigger, a moment in the future that mirrors the helplessness of the original event. When that trigger occurs, the vault explodes. The original trauma rushes back with devastating retroactive force, hitting the victim years or decades later. The handcuffs are the trigger. Being pinned to the bed by a man she trusted is the exact catalyst her subconscious has been dreading for nearly 30 years. As the sun sets and the cabin plunges into shadows, the mental dam inside Jessie's head finally crumbles completely. The voices of Goody and Ruth fade into the background. A new voice emerges. It is the voice of a 10-year-old girl. Jessie calls this voice Pumpkin. It is the childhood nickname her father gave her. This is the pure, unfiltered memory of the trauma breaking through the barrier of time. The sensory reality of the cabin begins to warp. The smell of Gerald's decaying body and the wet fur of the stray dog vanish from Jessie's nose. The heavy, dark shadows of the pine trees outside the window melt away. The agonizing pinch of the steel cuffs around her swollen wrists is replaced by a different kind of pressure. The memory of July 20th, 1963 invades the present moment with terrifying clarity. Jessie is no longer a grown woman trapped in a vacation home. Her mind forces her backward. She is 10 years old again. She is sitting on the wooden deck of her childhood lake house. She feels the rough, scratchy fabric of her father's trousers against the back of her legs. She tastes the sharp, overwhelming flavor of peppermint from the lipstick on her mouth, mixed with the sour tang of his nervous sweat. She feels the unbearable, suffocating heat of his hand resting on her thigh. She looks up, and through the window of the cabin, she sees the sky changing. She hallucinates the total solar eclipse happening all over again. The moon slides over the sun. The light in the bedroom turns a sickly metallic purple. The temperature in the room plummets, mirroring the unnatural chill of the cosmic event. The psychological horror reaches its absolute peak. Jessie is experiencing two distinct nightmares simultaneously. Her physical body is dying of dehydration, while chained to a bed next to a rotting corpse. Her mind is trapped in the exact moment her father destroyed her innocence. The overwhelming grief, the profound shame, and the paralyzing guilt of the past crash into the desperate primal need to survive in the present. She realizes that her entire adult life has been a lie. She married Gerald because he was a safe, controlling substitute for her father. She allowed the handcuffs because her subconscious believed she deserved to be punished. The revelation is a crushing weight. The eclipse in her mind blocks out all hope. The shadow over Maine covers her entirely. She closes her eyes, ready to surrender to the darkness. She's ready to let the stray dog finish its meal. She's ready to die on the bed. But that isn't even the darkest part. The human mind is a fragile organ. But the cosmic architecture of Stephen King's universe is vast and deeply interconnected. The 1963 eclipse was not just a memory. It was not just a symbol of her father's abuse. The eclipse was a literal telepathic bridge. When Jessie's mind violently hurls itself back to that exact moment in 1963, she accidentally reopens the door. She reactivates the psychic tether. The intense, concentrated agony of her present situation acts as a massive surge of electricity, firing down the dormant wire connecting her to the coast of Little Tall Island. Through the thick, terrifying static of her own panic, Jessie hears something new. It is not the submissive voice of Goodwife Burlingame. It is not the sarcastic shouting of Ruth Neary. It is not the crying of her 10-year-old self. It is a completely alien presence inside her skull. The taste of peppermint and the smell of sweat is suddenly swept away by a harsh, freezing gust of ocean wind. She smells dead seaweed and crushed rocks. A voice speaks to her. It is the rough, tired, unyielding voice of an old woman. It is Dolores Claiborne. The connection that was forged in a fraction of a second decades ago is now a permanent fixture in the Macroverse. Dolores does not know Jessie's name. Jessie does not know Dolores's name, but their souls recognize the exact frequency of their shared suffering. During the eclipse, Dolores looked into the void and saw a terrified girl. Now, the terrified girl looks into the void and finds the hard, hardened woman. The transfer of energy is visceral and immediate. Jessie feels a sudden, shocking surge of foreign willpower inject itself directly into her nervous system. It feels like a shot of pure adrenaline straight to the heart. Dolores's presence is not comforting. It is demanding. It is the presence of a woman who looked at a monster, built a trap, and pushed that monster down a dark, dry well. Dolores's voice cuts through the layers of Jessie's guilt and shame. The message is clear. Survival requires a willingness to embrace the violence. Survival requires destroying the trap no matter the cost. This psychic intervention changes the entire trajectory of the narrative. The voice of Dolores gives Jessie the specific, brutal kind of strength she needs to execute an unthinkable plan. The submissive goody is finally silenced forever. The rebellious Ruth provides the focus. The memory of the eclipse provides the key. In 1963, her father warned her to be careful not to cut her hands on the sharp edges of the soot-stained smoked glass. That buried detail rises to the surface. Jessie looks at the glass of water sitting on the shelf above her head. The execution of her escape is a masterclass in physical sensory horror. Guided by the ruthless survival instinct bleeding through the telepathic tether, Jessie forces her swollen, aching fingers to reach up and knock the heavy glass off the shelf. The glass shatters against the floor. A jagged, triangular shard of thick glass remains within her limited grasp. She picks it up. The edge is razor-sharp. She does not use the glass to pick the lock. She cannot reach the keyhole. She uses the glass on herself. She presses the sharp edge against the fragile, pale skin of her right wrist, just above the biting steel of the handcuff. She takes a deep breath, inhaling the smell of the stray dog and the rotting corpse, and she slices deep into her own flesh. The pain is blinding. It is a white-hot sheet of fire shooting up her arm and exploding behind her eyes. Hot, thick blood instantly pours from the wound. It coats the cold steel of the cuff. It drips down her forearm, soaking into the mattress. The smell of fresh, metallic copper fills the air, sending the stray dog into a frenzy. But Jessie does not stop. She needs the blood. The blood is not a byproduct of the injury. The blood is the tool. She is using her own blood as a lubricant. With her wrists slick with hot gore, she begins to pull. The steel ring of the handcuff catches on the bones of her hand. The metal scrapes against the joint. She pulls harder. The voice of Dolores screams in the back of her mind, urging her to keep going. Jessie pulls with the violent, desperate strength of a trapped animal chewing off its own leg. The skin on the back of her hand begins to stretch. The friction is unbearable. Then the skin tears. Jessie gives herself a profound, horrific, degloving injury. The mechanical force of pulling her hand through the unyielding steel ring physically strips the skin, fat, and muscle away from the bone. The sound is a sickening, wet, ripping noise, like a thick piece of wet canvas being torn in half. The physical sensation is an absolute nightmare of sensory overload. She feels the layers of her own body peeling backward like a bloody glove. The agony threatens to send her into a fatal state of shock, but her hand slips through. The bloody mass of flesh clears the metal ring. Her right arm falls free, hitting the mattress with a heavy, wet thud. The physical relief of the release is immediately swallowed by the catastrophic trauma of the injury. She looks at her right hand. The text describes it perfectly. Her hand no longer looked like the sort of equipment normally issued to human beings. It is a ruined, mangled claw of exposed white bone, torn tendons and streaming red blood. Yet she is free. The tether to Dolores gave her the psychological permission to destroy herself in order to save herself. She uses her mangled right hand to reach across the bed. She grabs the keys from the bureau. Her blood-slicked fingers fumble with the small metal object. The keys make a series of small, steely clicks inside the lock of the left handcuff. The metal jaws open. Jessie rolls off the heavy mahogany bed. She hits the floor. Her knees buckle instantly. The loss of blood, the severe dehydration, and the massive psychological shock crash down on her all at once. The room spins violently. She manages to drag her battered, bleeding body toward the door. She has survived the trap of the abusive husband. She has survived the trap of her own repressed memories. She faints on the floor, the darkness rushing up to claim her conscious mind. When she finally awakens, the sun has completely set. The cabin is plunged into total darkness. The stray dog is gone, chased away by the sudden movements. The silence of the remote woods returns, heavier and more oppressive than before. Jessie is weak. Her heart beats a faint, erratic rhythm in her chest. She is physically unbound. The heavy police cuffs are empty on the bed. She has won the battle of endurance. She has conquered the psychological demons living in her head. She has severed the invisible chains of her past. But as she lies bleeding on the cold hardwood floor, her eyes slowly adjust to the pitch-black gloom of the bedroom. She looks past the foot of the bed. She looks into the deepest, darkest corner of the room. The shadow over Maine was not just a manifestation of her trauma. The eclipse did not just summon the voice of an old woman on an island. When you radiate pure, unfiltered agony into the dark spaces of the Stephen King multiverse, you act as a beacon. The energy attracts predators. Standing perfectly still in the corner of the bedroom is a tall, unnaturally thin figure. It is holding a wicker basket filled with stolen jewelry and human bones. The smell of rotting earth and ancient cosmic decay rolls off its body. Jessie thought the monster in the room was just another hallucination, a trick of the moonlight bleeding through the window. She thought she was finally alone. She thought the worst was over. But the true horror of the 1963 eclipse is about to reveal itself in the flesh, and it proves that her nightmare is connected to something far older and far more malevolent than any human being. Chapter 4. All things serve the beam. The physical trap is broken. The heavy police handcuffs lay empty on the mahogany bed. The mattress is soaked in dark, cooling blood. Jessie Burlingame rests on the hard, wooden floorboards of the remote Kashwakamak Lake cabin. Her body is a ruined, exhausted shell. Her right hand is a mangled, bleeding mass of exposed bone and torn muscle. The pain radiates up her arm in hot electric waves. She breathes in shallow, ragged gasps. The air in the room is thick. It tastes like copper and stale dust. The sun has vanished entirely. The deep Maine woods outside the window are swallowed by pitch-black night. The silence is absolute, heavy and suffocating. Jessie thinks the nightmare is over. She thinks she has survived the ultimate test of endurance. She severed the chains of her abusive husband. She conquered the fractured, bickering voices inside her own mind. She reached across the decades, grabbed the psychic tether connected to Dolores Claiborne, and pulled herself out of the dark. Now, she only needs to find the strength to stand up, walk out the front door, and drive away. She forces her heavy eyelids open. Her vision is blurry from massive blood loss and severe dehydration. She stares into the pitch-black gloom of the bedroom. She looks past the foot of the bed. She looks into the deepest, darkest corner of the room, near the closet door. The darkness in that corner is not empty. The darkness has a shape. A figure stands perfectly still in the shadows. It is unnaturally tall. It is far too thin to be a normal human being. The sheer proportions of the silhouette violate the natural laws of biology. The arms hang down past the knees. The fingers are impossibly long, resembling pale, segmented spiders resting against the dark fabric of a coat. The head is large, blocky, and tilted at an unnatural angle. The sensory reality of the bedroom changes instantly. The faint scent of her dead husband's decaying body is erased. A new, far more pungent odor fills the enclosed space. It is a dense, suffocating stench. It smells like old, turned earth. It smells like rotting roots, damp stone, and ancient dust. It is the undeniable putrid smell of an open grave. Jessie's heart hammers a frantic, erratic rhythm against her bruised ribs. Her fractured mind scrambles to process the visual information. She assumes this towering, misshapen entity is another hallucination. She thinks it is a projection of her dying brain. She thinks it is the physical manifestation of her father, Tom Mahout, returning from the grave to punish her for breaking the silence. She thinks it is the Grim Reaper, a supernatural harbinger of death, stepping out of the shadows to claim her soul. In a moment of desperate, childlike regression, she calls the figure the Space Cowboy, a nickname pulled from an old Steve Miller Band song echoing in her shattered memory. She whispers into the dark. She tells the figure that it is not real. She tells the figure that it is only made of moonlight. The figure does not vanish. The figure takes a step forward. The floorboards groan under a massive, heavy weight. The entity carries a woven wicker basket. As the figure shifts in the dark, the contents of the basket rattle. The sound is dry and hollow. It is the distinct, unmistakable sound of old dried bones clacking against each other, mixed with the sharp, metallic jingling of stolen jewelry. This towering entity is not a hallucination. This is not the ghost of her father. This is not the Grim Reaper. The creature standing in the corner of the bedroom is a living, breathing man made of flesh and bone. His name is Raymond Andrew Joubert. To understand the sheer horror of Raymond Andrew Joubert, we must look at the factual law established in Stephen King's universe. Joubert is not a cosmic god, but his actions mimic the darkest monsters of the multiverse. He is a prolific serial killer. He is a drifter who haunts the isolated back roads and empty vacation homes of western Maine. But murder is only a secondary hobby for Joubert. His primary obsession is the dead. He is an infamous grave robber and a necrophile. Joubert spends his nights breaking into local cemeteries and family crypts. He uses heavy iron crowbars to crack open sealed mausoleums. He pries the lids off heavy oak coffins. He drags the rotting, decaying corpses out into the moonlight. He desecrates the bodies in unimaginable ways. He removes their limbs, cuts off their fingers, and takes their teeth as trophies. He commits horrific, unspeakable sexual acts with the decaying remains of the dead. He collects the discarded bones and the tarnished jewelry left behind in the caskets, carrying them in a wicker basket like a grotesque collection of souvenirs. The monstrous, terrifying physical appearance of the space cowboy is not a supernatural illusion. Raymond Andrew Joubert suffers from a severe, untreated medical condition known as acromegaly. This disorder occurs when a tumor forms on the pituitary gland, causing the body to overproduce growth hormone. The physical symptoms of acromegaly turn Joubert into a walking nightmare. The condition causes his hands and feet to swell to massive, disproportionate sizes. It elongates his jawbone, creating a heavy, protruding brow and a distorted, blocky facial structure. It causes his teeth to spread far apart, leaving dark, gaping spaces in his mouth. When Jessie looks at him in the dim moonlight filtering through the cabin window, she sees a literal monster. She sees a giant, twisted ghoul straight out of a horror comic book. Joubert stands over her. He watches her bleed. He listens to her ragged breathing. He is a predator who feeds on the helpless. He found the cabin door unlocked, left open by Gerald in his arrogant rush to begin his twisted game. Joubert stepped inside. He stood in the shadows for hours. He watched Jessie struggle against the heavy steel handcuffs. He watched the stray dog tear chunks of flesh from Gerald's face. He absorbed the sheer, unfiltered terror radiating from the bed. The presence of this necrophile in the corner of the room represents a terrifying intersection of King's thematic lore. Jessie just spent the last 2 days battling the psychological ghosts of her past. She fought the memory of her abusive father. She fought the toxic, submissive conditioning of her mother. She won the battle inside her own mind. But Stephen King refuses to let the horror remain purely internal. The moment Jessie defeats the monsters in her head, the universe presents her with a real, physical monster standing in her bedroom. This raises a massive, monumental question. Why is he here? Why did a serial-killing grave robber wander into this specific remote cabin on this specific weekend, at the exact moment a traumatized woman was handcuffed to a bed? In the vast, sprawling expanse of the Maine woods, the mathematical probability of this encounter is astronomically low. It feels like an impossible coincidence. But in the Stephen King multiverse, coincidence does not exist. To understand the true nature of this encounter, we must escalate the stakes. We must look beyond the rotting floorboards of the cabin. We must look past the tree line. We must look deep into the cosmic architecture of reality itself. We must examine the invisible gears turning behind the sky. We must talk about Ka, and we must talk about the Dark Tower. In the 2017 film adaptation of Gerald's Game, directed by Mike Flanagan, there is a specific, crucial line of dialogue inserted into the script. As Jessie's mind deteriorates, she hallucinates a conversation with her dead husband, Gerald. The hallucination taunts her. He tells her that she's going to die. He tells her that she's entirely helpless. And then he speaks a single, cryptic sentence that shatters the boundaries of the isolated thriller. The hallucination taps her on the forehead and says, All things serve the beam. This is not a random collection of words. This phrase is the ultimate key to unlocking the cosmic horror of the entire Stephen King mythos. It is a direct, undeniable reference to King's magnum opus, the Dark Tower series. In the center of King's multiverse stands the Dark Tower. The tower is the linchpin of all creation. It holds every single universe, every single timeline, and every single dimension together. The tower is supported by 6 invisible, metaphysical cables of pure energy. These cables are called the beams. The beams stretch across the infinite void of the Macroverse, connecting different worlds, different realities, and different people. Everything that happens in the Stephen King universe is influenced by the magnetic, gravitational pull of the beams. When the hallucination says, "All things serve the beam," it confirms a terrifying, mind-bending truth. The events inside the Kashwakamak Lake cabin are not isolated incidents. Jessie's suffering is not just a random tragedy. Her pain is part of a massive, interconnected cosmic design. Let us connect the dots. Let us trace the line of energy back to the beginning. On July 20th, 1963, a total solar eclipse plunged the state of Maine into darkness. During that celestial event, 10-year-old Jessie was sexually assaulted by her father. Miles away, Dolores Claiborne murdered her abusive husband. The sheer, concentrated agony and survival instinct of these two women ripped a hole in the fabric of reality. They formed a permanent telepathic tether. They proved that they possess a dormant, powerful psychic ability. King calls this ability the touch or the shine. The shine is a psychic frequency. It is a genetic, supernatural sensitivity to the forces of the universe. When a person with the shine experiences massive, catastrophic trauma, they do not just cry out in the physical world. Their mind broadcasts a blinding psychic flare into the Macroverse. They ring a bell in the dark. For nearly 30 years, Jessie buried her trauma. She buried the memory of the eclipse. She suppressed her shine. She lived a quiet, muffled existence. But when Gerald died on the floor, and the heavy steel handcuffs bit into her wrists, the psychological vault exploded. The exact conditions of her childhood helplessness were recreated. The psychic dam broke. Jessie screamed into the void. She reached out and grabbed the tether connected to Dolores. The energy required to span that mental distance was massive. This psychic explosion acted as a brilliant, blinding lighthouse beacon in the dark woods of Maine. The Macroverse is not empty. The spaces between the worlds are filled with ancient, hungry entities. Monsters like Pennywise the dancing clown and the psychic vampire Dandolo feed on human fear. They are drawn to the scent of terror. They are attracted to the bright, burning energy of a shining mind in distress. Raymond Andrew Joubert is a human being, but his soul is entirely corrupt. He is a creature of absolute depravity. He spends his life dwelling in the dirt, surrounded by the rotting dead. He operates on a base, predatory frequency. He is sensitive to the dark currents of the universe. Joubert did not wander into the cabin by accident. The invisible forces of Ka pulled him there. The blinding psychic flare radiating from Jessie's fractured, shining mind drew the necrophile through the woods like a magnet pulling iron filings. The universe used her trauma to summon a monster. The connection between the abused woman and the grave robber proves that human evil and cosmic forces are deeply, inextricably linked. The beams guide the predators to the prey. But that isn't even the darkest part. The darkest part is the realization that the universe does not care about justice. The universe is a machine. Ka is a wheel, and the wheel rolls over anyone standing in its path. The psychic tether that saved Jessie's life by giving her the strength of Dolores Claiborne is the exact same mechanism that summoned Raymond Andrew Joubert to her bedroom. The survival tool and the death sentence were forged from the exact same cosmic energy. All things serve the beam. The good, the bad, the trauma, and the triumph are all just fuel for the infinite engine of the Dark Tower. Jessie lies bleeding on the floor. She looks at the towering, misshapen ghoul in the corner. She throws her diamond wedding ring at him. She tosses the symbol of her oppressive marriage into the darkness, hoping to distract the monster with a shiny trinket. Joubert bends down. His massive, elongated hands scoop up the ring. He places it into his wicker basket of bones. Jessie uses this single moment of distraction to move. She drags her battered, mutilated body out of the bedroom. She leaves a thick, wet trail of blood on the hardwood floor. She reaches the front door. She stumbles out into the freezing night air. She climbs into her car. She manages to start the engine and speed away from the cabin, leaving the space cowboy behind in the dark. She drives until her body completely fails. She crashes the car and loses consciousness, finally escaping the physical boundary of the nightmare. The payoff to this cosmic and psychological terror arrives months later. The physical wounds heal. The degloved skin on her right hand is stitched together, leaving a massive, permanent scar. But the mental wounds require a different kind of closure. The police eventually capture Raymond Andrew Joubert. They find his massive stash of stolen jewelry. They find the horrifying remains of the corpses he mutilated. They arrest him and bring him to trial. Jessie chooses to attend the court hearing. She walks into the sterile, brightly lit courtroom. She sits in the gallery. She watches the heavy wooden doors open. The guards lead Joubert into the room in chains. Seeing him in the harsh, fluorescent light of day strips away the supernatural illusion. He is no longer a shadow in the corner. He is no longer the grim reaper. He is a pathetic, sick, twisted man. He is hunched over. His face is heavily distorted by the acromegaly. He looks grotesque, but he does not look invincible. The cosmic dread evaporates, leaving behind only the ugly, mundane reality of human sickness. Jessie stands up. She approaches the aisle as Joubert walks past. The tension in the courtroom is suffocating. She looks directly into the eyes of the monster who stood in her bedroom. She needs to know the truth. She needs to separate the hallucinations of her broken mind from the reality of the physical world. During the night in the cabin, she whispered a phrase to him. She told him he was an illusion. Joubert stops walking. He looks down at Jessie. His lips curl into a sick, twisted smile, revealing the dark gaps between his teeth. He leans forward. He mimics her voice. He speaks the exact words she whispered in the dark. "You're not real," Joubert hisses. "You're only made of moonlight." The confirmation hits Jessie like a physical blow. The space cowboy was real. He was in the room. He watched her bleed. The horror was not entirely in her head. But instead of breaking her, this undeniable proof liberates her. The confirmation shatters the final remnants of her childhood conditioning. For her entire life, her father, her mother, and her husband told her to doubt her own reality. They told her to keep quiet. They told her that her pain was just a game, or a misunderstanding, or a secret meant to be buried. Joubert's twisted taunt proves that her perception is accurate. Her pain is real. Her memory is real. The monster is real. Jessie does not shrink away. She does not submit. She summons the fierce, unyielding strength passed down through the psychic tether from Dolores Claiborne. Jessie gathers the saliva in her mouth, leans forward, and violently spits directly into Raymond Andrew Joubert's face. The spit hits the ghoul. The spell is broken. The ultimate act of defiance reclaims her power. She rejects the silence. She rejects the victimhood. She walks out of the courtroom, finally stepping out of the path of the eclipse. She is free from the shadow of the men who tried to trap her in the dark. The story of Jessie Burlingame and Dolores Claiborne reaches its end. Two women, separated by miles of deep woods and freezing ocean, survived the monstrous men in their lives. They survived the traps. They survived the psychic collision of a total solar eclipse. They proved that the human mind can endure unspeakable agony and forge weapons out of the trauma. But as the heavy courtroom doors swing shut, a dark, lingering question remains. Jesse's massive burst of psychic energy acted as a flare in the night. It drew a human ghoul to an empty cabin in the woods. But we know the rules of the Stephen King multiverse. We know that the beams connect all worlds. We know that extreme terror acts as a dinner bell for the entities dwelling in the Macroverse. Raymond Andrew Joubert was just a man with a medical condition and a sick obsession. He was the smallest scavenger in the woods, the first to arrive at the scene of the psychic feast. If a simple human monster could hear the screaming frequency of Jesse's mind from miles away, what else heard it? What ancient shape-shifting entities, sleeping beneath the sewers of nearby towns, felt that massive surge of pure, delicious fear vibrate across the cosmic web? The Eclipse tether forged a weapon, but it also painted a massive target on the state of Maine. And in the dark spaces between the stars, the true eaters of worlds are always listening for the dinner bell to ring.